The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus went around to all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and curing every disease and illness. At the sight of the crowds, his heart was moved with pity for them, because they were troubled and abandoned, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is abundant, but the laborers are few. So ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers for his harvest." The Gospel of the Lord. And what makes Jesus so hard to follow, especially if we think about it, if we were alive in that day and age, would we know it was God in our midst? I don't know, it would be hard. Just like when Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" Then all the different answers came up, and you get it. Would we be like Peter and say, "Yeah, you're God in the flesh"? But we hear in the first reading what God does, why he's so confounding, is that he always chooses the poor to shame the wise, as we heard. God became one of us, or in that beautiful hymn of praise in the Philippians, he said that God did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave and becoming one of us. In other words, he became poor. St. Vincent de Paul, writing in a letter, the great servant of the poor, he would marvel at the poor, not because he wanted to feel better about himself, because Christ commands us to be close to the poor, but rather he knew that the poor was a reminder to him precisely how God acts. Who empties himself becomes poor and becomes vulnerable. And that is why from the very beginning of our church, we always stay close to the poor. And when I say poor, I'm not just meaning materially poor, because that's immediately where our mind goes to, the food locker. Okay, I go help out of the food locker. But there are so many different levels of poor. Spiritually poor, emotionally poor, socially poor, meaning they have no friends, they're lonely, and materially poor, of course. But as Christians, we are the richest people on earth, by the way. Why? Because of our faith in Christ. Now take that richness and go to the poor. The poor are in our midst. They're in your families, they are your children, they are your grandchildren. They are your neighbor, they are your parishioners, they are your priests. Stay close to the poor, because Christ is poor. And if we want to be like him, stay close to them.